Most people who see this painting for the first time think they are looking at chaos. They are wrong. What Pieter Bruegel the Elder painted in 1562 is not a riot, it is not a fever dream, it is not even a warning, it is a machine, a factory, operating at full capacity. And if you stand in front of it long enough, you begin to understand that every single element, every figure, every object, every shadow is exactly where it was placed to be, deliberately, coldly, with the precision of an engineer. The triumph of death is not a scene of the end of the world. It is a diagram of how the end of the world works. The first thing that hits you is the sky. But do not mistake it for atmosphere, for mood, for painterly flourish. That sky is not dramatic. It is finished. It is the colour of a world that has already burned, a choking, yellowish darkness that is not sunrise or sunset or storm. It is the permanent condition of what comes after. The hills in the distance are not hills anymore. They are graves that forgot to lie flat. The sea on the horizon is black. The trees are stripped to bone. And those distant columns of fire do not flicker with urgency. They have been burning long enough to become ordinary. This is not a landscape on the edge of catastrophe. The catastrophe is over. We arrived late. What we are watching is the cleanup. In the upper left, skeletal figures ride a wagon loaded not with weapons, not with treasure, but with bells. They are ringing them continuously, for no one in particular and for everyone at once. In the 16th century, a death knell was rung by a church, a single bell for a specific soul, so that the community would stop and pray. Bruegel's skeletons have loaded the bells onto a cart and taken the ringing out of the church entirely. The bells here announce nothing. They confirm everything. They do not mourn. They simply mark, the way a factory marks shift changes, that the work is ongoing and the work is on time. But Bruegel does not stop there. On the wall of the hollow mausoleum at the centre left of the canvas, there is a mechanical clock, and a skeleton has smashed through that wall and extended one bony finger directly at the numeral 1. 1 o'clock, the final hour. This is not symbolic decoration. This is Bruegel making his logistics argument explicit. Time is not running out. Time has been manually stopped by something that no longer needs it, pointing at the exact moment the machine achieved completion. The bells ring the shift change. The clock records when the last shift began, and neither of them required a single living soul to authorize it. Now look at the center, and look carefully, because this is where Bruegel performs his most devastating trick. The army of skeletons does not surge forward in a mob. It advances in formation. They carry shields fashioned from coffin lids, and they hold them edge to edge, overlapping, forming a literal wall, a barricade, a grid that presses from the left side of the canvas toward the right, methodical, unrushed, consuming everything in its path with the patience of something that has nowhere else to be. This wall is not a metaphor, it is a compositional trap. Bruegel has engineered the perspective so that every line of the painting, the diagonal of the road, the angle of the hill, the recession of the army, funnels toward the right edge of the canvas. But there is no right edge that offers escape. There is only the Great Coffin, a vast, dark, rectangular container into which figures are being herded without ceremony. And if you look at its door, there is a large red cross painted on it. In the 16th century, that mark meant one specific thing to anyone who had survived plague: quarantine, official transport, government-sanctioned removal of the infected. Bruegel has not painted a monster's lair or a hellmouth. He has painted something that looks like a plague cart writ enormous, a state-administered processing facility, marked with the cross of public health emergency, doing its paperwork with the thoroughness of a bureaucracy that answers to no one. This is not a villain's domain. This is an institution. And institutions, unlike villains, do not stop when you ask them to. You are not looking at a view, you are standing inside a funnel. At the center of this advancing line, a skeleton rides a horse and raises an hourglass, not as a warning, not as a gesture of mercy, as a signal. Time has already run out. The hourglass is simply confirming what the landscape already told us. And the horse beneath this rider is not pale. It is not the classical white horse of heroic painting. It is the color of dried blood, a cadaverous, emaciated mare, the sickly brownish red of something that has been burning from the inside. This is a deliberate reference any 16th century viewer would have recognized instantly. The fiery red horse of the Book of Revelation, the horse of war, the second seal. Bruegel is not painting a generic death figure on a generic mount. He is painting a specific horseman from a specific prophecy arriving exactly on schedule. This figure is not death announcing its arrival. It is death mid-sentence. In the middle of a task it has been doing for a very long time, with no particular feeling about it. This is the most unsettling thing in the painting. Not the violence, not the scale, not the fire. It is the absence of malice. The skeleton on the horse is not angry. It is not triumphant. It is indifferent. And indifference at this scale is more terrifying than hate. And then, in the bottom right corner, Bruegel gives us the most quietly devastating image in the history of European painting. Two lovers sit on the ground. A young man plays a lute. A young woman sings from a sheet of music. They are leaning toward each other, lost in the music, lost in each other, romantic, tender. But look at the table beside them. There is a plate on it, and the plate does not hold food. It holds bones, a skull. Death was not just the uninvited musician in this scene, it was the waiter. It set the table before they arrived, served them their own remains on a plate, and they were too absorbed in each other to notice what had been placed in front of them. The feast was always a mockery, the banquet was always a farewell. And behind them, completely unseen, a skeleton is playing along, holding a fiddle, bowing in time, a silent third musician in a trio the lovers do not know they have joined. This is the image Bruegel chose to put in the corner, not a battle, not a prayer, two people making music to drown out the sound of their own extinction. They are not in denial, they are doing the only human thing left to do. They are insisting against all evidence that beauty still has a claim on the world. And the skeleton behind them is not mocking them. It is, in its own way, agreeing with them. That is the unbearable part. Now look at what is scattered across this field, not randomly. Look at what Bruegel chose to include and understand that to a viewer in 1562, these were not props. They were political statements. In the left foreground, a king sits collapsing, attended by skeletons. His barrels of gold are being tipped over into the dirt. The coins pour out and mean nothing. To a 16th century Flemish audience, living under the financial violence of the Spanish Empire, this image of a crowned man watching his gold spill into the mud was not abstract. It was a commentary on the entire architecture of power. The idea that wealth could insulate you, that crowns conferred immunity, that titles were armour. The painting answers, they are not. A little further, a cardinal's red hat, a pilgrim's staff, a discarded pilgrim's hat, bearing the scallop shell of Santiago de Compostela. The pilgrim's hat is not worn, it is dropped. The journey to the holy site has ended before it reached the site. The gesture of piety, the proof of devotion, it lies in the mud with the gold. And there a backgammon board overturned in the dirt. To a modern eye it reads as leisure, as culture. To a 16th century Flemish viewer it read as something more specific, vice. Backgammon in this period was inseparable from gambling dens and brothels. It was the game of folly, the deliberate, pleasurable waste of the time God gave you. Bruegel is not simply saying that death interrupted your sophistication. He is saying that death interrupted your sins. That the skeleton arrived in the middle of something you knew you probably shouldn't have been doing. The board is face down in the carnage, not as a symbol of culture lost, but as a symbol of folly that ran out of runway. Death doesn't just stop your work, it interrupts your vices mid-hand. This is what Bruegel is saying with each of these objects. No category of human experience earns you an exemption. Not wealth, not faith, not piety, not pleasure, not even sin. Memento mori. Remember you will die. The phrase had been used for centuries as a whisper, a private meditation, a carving on a sundial. Bruegel painted it as a fact of logistics. Look at it from the widest angle now. See the scale of it. How many figures, how many simultaneous deaths, how many small stories happening at once across every inch of the canvas. This is what Bruegel understood that no painter before him had fully grasped at this scale. That death does not come for one person at a time in a quiet room. It comes like a system failure. Everything, everywhere, at once. And most of it happens in the middle of something else. In the middle of a meal, a game, a conversation, a song. The bells on that wagon ring for no one. They ring because ringing is what bells do. The finger on the clock points to 1 because that is where the machine stopped. The smoke rises because that is what smoke does. The skeletons advance because that is their function. This is a wasteland without a mourner, without a witness, without a single figure in the painting who has the perspective to understand what they are watching. Except us. We are the only ones who can see the whole composition. We are the ones standing outside the funnel, looking in. The triumph of death is one of the canonical images of Western art, not because it shocks. Many paintings shock. It is canonical because it shows us something true that we spend our entire lives with extraordinary effort and creativity trying not to think about. That the world does not stop when we stop. That the music we make in the last moments is real music. That the skeleton keeping time behind us does not diminish the song. And that the Great Coffin, marked with its red cross, waiting with bureaucratic patience, does not care at all that we are in the middle of a beautiful verse. Bruegel painted that in 1562 on a wooden panel about 1.2 meters wide, and it still fits the whole world inside it. Memento mori. The bells ring for no one, the clock stopped at 1. The coffin takes everyone. The lovers play on.